God does not love homosexuals. Homosexuality is not African, it's a Western import, right? And so these are kind of the principles on which homophobes, transphobes, and bigots are standing to justify their hatred towards a section of society. Right, so my name is Friedel Dausab. I am Namibian, born in Tsumeb, UK. I've just kind of reached what you say midlife, right? So I turned 50 this year. But 25 of those 50 years I've lived with HIV. And that being diagnosed with HIV was actually the starting point of my activism and advocacy, moving me from my previous employment as a flight attendant for Air Namibia to really working with civil society organizations to ensure that people living with HIV were getting the right treatment, appropriate services, that medications were available for people, and that we were using a right language to address people. Because I was born in Sumet, in the north central parts of Namibia. And I come from a very Christian background in a Christian home, having grown up in the church. My mom was a missionary. I went to Martin Luther High School. And so I think the formative years of my life were really couched in Christian culture, but also within the Christian belief system.
Okay, would you say that you left your job because you said you were flight attendant with Air Namibia?
Yeah.
Did you leave your job because of your diagnosis, or was it just on your own?
It was a major consideration.
From the company?
No, not from the company. No, from my own health. You know, when you're a flight attendant, you work for 10 hours, 12 hours in the air that is conditioned.
Yeah.
Right, so you don't have fresh air. There's also a lot more risk of bacteria, viruses, etc. And it's a very fast-paced lifestyle.
Yeah.
I was 25 when I was diagnosed, so I was quite a young person. And when I was diagnosed, the doctors, my doctor in any case, told me that if I don't get into treatment, I have 2 years to live. It was in 2000 before ARVs were available.
Wow.
Right, I think in 2003 we introduced ARVs for the first time for mothers who were pregnant to make sure that they don't give HIV to their babies. And so during that time, there was a lot of advocacy. I don't know if you remember Emma Tohepa. Young people that
I did hear the name. I do hear the name in books and all that. Yes.
So that was really the time when there was a lot of youth activism to ensure that the stigma and discrimination against people living with HIV was addressed, but that medications were available, but also that services were friendly at public hospitals. And so that sort of really started my career in activism, moving from aviation to activism. But soon after that, I realized that, we are sort of providing better services for everyone who's HIV positive, but we couldn't see some of the populations being served. So we didn't see some of the populations that were at risk, like gay men, bisexual men, sex workers, people who are using inject drugs, young people being treated fairly and getting a good service at service points. And so much of my advocacy over the last 25 or so years has really been to ensure that our national policy or the national strategic framework for HIV is more inclusive of all populations in Namibia, and that everyone was able to ensure that they could prevent getting HIV. They had access to these prevention tools that were available, but in case that they were HIV positive, that they got appropriate, acceptable services that were readily available at times when they needed it.
I see. Because I see like during now the time of 2003, 4, that those early years. So that time I think like people started the gay men, the homosexual, and they were not really have that freedom of going to the hospitals or clinic to receive those services as the other people.
Yeah, no, I mean, when I started off, the response that we were getting from government is, we don't have them. They don't exist. And so it was.
But other people were getting it.
Yes. But they were saying, we don't have gay men. We don't have homosexuals in Namibia. And so, because we don't have them, we don't need to provide services for them. So what happened was that around that time, we got some money. Or I started looking for money together with a friend. We got some money in and we started working together with the then LGBT organization called the Rainbow Project, and started the first HIV prevention, treatment and care program for LGBT people. What happened was that we paired up with some countries, Lesotho, Botswana, to do a regional study on HIV rates among gay and bisexual men. The data that we collected showed that we existed, but there was also a problem. Just like the heterosexual people, homosexual people were at risk of HIV. And we presented this data to government. It took some years, but now we have a national strategic framework for responding to HIV that is inclusive of many of these populations that were neglected in the beginning. So we have in a national strategic framework provision to provide services for gay men, bisexual men, and other men who have sex with men, for sex workers and of all hues and colors, for people who inject drugs or use drugs. We have to go even further to make sure that under orphans and vulnerable children, we do give services for homeless and street-based children and people who may have a lot more difficulty accessing public life, going to hospitals, etc. I think, my perspective is that because HIV is an infectious disease, if you leave behind a section of community, you are not addressing the entire problem. It's almost like you are saying, okay, those people don't matter, but those people interact with the rest of society, right? And so if you don't plug that hole for HIV and provide proper services to people, to everyone, there is always going to be a linkage to HIV. That's into the general population. And the point is that we want to get rid of HIV transmissions among people, and we want to ensure that people who have HIV go on treatment. They don't get sick from HIV, but what we know today also is important, that if someone who is HIV positive goes on treatment, their viral levels are suppressed. Even if they have sex without a condom, they cannot transmit HIV to their sexual partner. And so I think it really makes sense that government has actually included all these populations and continues to include other populations who are at risk but are not included within our national response to HIV control and management.
That's actually true. That makes a lot of sense, because no matter how much we try to discriminate or to ignore that the certain population lives within that community, like we are ignoring that there are no gay men and there are no homosexuals in the community, but people are there. and you're just trying to ignore the situation, which you're actually not helping we're not helping in that situation actually. So would you say while we're actually in this conversation, would you say that Africans are actually free to choose to love whoever they want?
Not in terms of the law, in terms of the way that we are as people, right? Everyone has a capacity to love. Every human being has a capacity to love, and that's what my Christian ethos as a follower of Jesus tells me that God is love. And because we are created in the image and likeness of God, we are also love. And so that is really the basic nature of humanity, of every human being, is to laugh and to be happy. And when we are unable to laugh and when we are unable to be happy, that's when we get ill. We get depressed, we get mentally ill, or we get ill in our physical bodies. Science and research has shown that when people are not touched, they are not hugged, they don't have other human beings with which they have really good relations where they share and exchange love, then we get social problems. Then we get addictions. People who are addicted to alcohol, they're addicted to food, they're addicted to all sorts of things because they are looking for love from these substances because we all want to feel good. Every human being wants to feel good. But once you cannot tell people that we use a law to say we are not going to allow you to laugh, then I think the question that remains is what does it mean for people who are excluded, who are marginalized, who are pushed to the margins of society? Do we expect them to be productive citizens of our country, to build our economy, to ensure that we live in peace, side by side, in a country post-independence, post-apartheid, which is really the vilest system of government that exists, that actually tells people that based on your skin color, based on your race, you're better than someone else. What is actually really a very disturbing thought system is that somehow homosexuality is un-African. Right? You hear this all the time. So you hear things like God does not love homosexuals, first and foremost. And then you hear homosexuality is not African, it's a Western import. Right? And so these are kind of the principles on which homophobes, transphobes, and bigots are standing to justify their hatred towards a section of society. What is strange is that homosexuality is a human attribute. Whether you go to China, whether you go to South America, you can go to all continents, you can go to the smallest village, right? You are likely to find someone who's homosexual. And so when we're saying that homosexuality is an African, are we actually saying that Africans are not humans? Because the rest of humanity has this attribute. It's almost like saying that having a light skin color is not African, right? It's really based on this backward belief system that was strengthened by colonialism, that was strengthened by disenfranchisement of Africa. Because what colonialism did in Africa is that they came in, they destroyed our cultures, our religions, our history. They kind of wiped off our history and put in place a new history for us. And over the last 100, 200 years of colonialism, we've forgotten what our actual traditions were. But we have some things to remember by, like Ubuntu, right? Even in my own language, you say kwenkwe, kwendikwe, or umuntu yabantu, right? That basic principles of African culture that says that I am because you are. And what is written into that saying is that if the two, I can only be defined by knowing you and having interactions with you. I am not by myself a person, right? And so if we look at this issue of personhood and Ubuntu, we kind of realize that we need to share love, kindness, to be able to build a society where there is no violence, no discrimination, no stigmatization of people based on belief systems and attributes as in deep.
That's very true. Okay, coming now, you said you've been in the activism for for over 20 years now. So what would you say are some of the major challenges that you actually faced, and like maybe the milestones that you have marked for more than like 20 years that you have been in activism?
Yeah, so I mean, I think that, part of the challenge of activism, and activism really in my field, which is around marginalized populations, people who have been pushed to the margins, almost unwanted by society, is that we now have a culture where some Africans, after a vile system of apartheid, believe that because of their culture or because of their language or because of some attribute that they have, like because they're heterosexual, they are better than other Namibians. And then they want to use our constitution, for example, to justify that hatred and to justify the fact that people are excluded from participating as equal citizens in our society. That's one of the major problems. We are not addressing violence, we are not addressing stigma, we are not addressing discrimination. And we know that these are not African values. We know, for example, that in my activism for equality for homosexual, bisexual, and transgender people, the big issue has been that some of the politicians, for example, have stood in parliament and called people Satanist, have stood in parliament and stood on a colonial law to say that we can continue to discriminate and exclude these people. At the same time, they are preaching to the crowd and saying, leave no one behind. So if you're leaving some people behind, then the ethos of leaving no one behind does not work anymore. If you're talking about a Namibian house, for every Namibian, those excluded, are they in the toilets or are they sleeping outside because there's no room that has been created for them inside the house? Right, and so we really get into a point where the superiority, I'm superior than you are because of my sexual orientation or my gender identity, becomes a problem, because what we have seen after the parliamentary debate, for example, is murders of LGBT people. Right? Gruesome ways in which people have been killed, because some of the people who are sick in their mind listen to the parliamentary debate, they believe our politicians, and go and act on what the politicians are saying. If my politician is saying in parliament, we don't want them in Namibia, they're unwelcome, they're Satanists. What stops someone who's unwell in their mind going out and killing someone who's a Satanist? There is a link between the rhetoric by our politicians and actions of their followers on the ground that lead to the killing and brutal murders that we've seen since September last year in Namibia.
So actually congratulations on the court case ruling that just happened on Friday. So can you just walk us through on you challenging the Namibian sodomy laws actually in court?
Yeah, no, so thank you for the congratulations. In order, I think it's a landmark justice. And the ruling itself is really bolstering our constitutional democracy. So this case started in June 2022, and it was really after many years where we were engaging with the politicians of Namibia to remove this law. So maybe just a little bit about the law.
Yeah.
That people might not know. This law, the initial law was enacted by King Henry IV in Britain. You know in what year that was? In 1533. And so the law is now, say, 491 years old. It is a colonial law by the aristocracy of England. And the reason why he enacted the law was to grab power from the Catholic Church, right? To take the property of the Catholic Church in Britain, and to establish the Anglican Church that we have today. Right? What happened then was that this law was experimented with and exported to all the colonies of Britain. So we have the same law in the Caribbean, we have the same law in India, we have the same law in Canada, for example, we have the same law in Australia and South Africa. Our bit of the law, so most of those countries have now decriminalized, including England, where the law has originated from. We got a bit of law from the apartheid state when we became independent in Namibia in 1991. We did not repeal that law as a colonial law. But you know what's even more worse was that over the last 20 years of activism, we've been asking government to remove the law that they are not using. No one has been convicted or arraigned in court as a result of this law over the last 30 years. And what it did was to make people who love each other criminals. So it criminalizes intimacy between two males.
Was it only two males or can also be two females?
Only two males. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it's defined as sex per annum between two males in Namibia. Right. The other law that is not talked about a lot more is the Unnatural Sexual Offences Act. So both of these laws have been declared as unconstitutional and invalid by the High Court of Namibia. And so what it really means is that it has been removed from our legal system altogether, from all acts of parliament, the common law itself. And something that people might not know is that this law, the common law, was under Schedule 1 of offenses in the common law. What it meant was that this law, the intimacy between two males, was classed the same as arson, as terrorism, and all other acts. And so it gave the police or other people like private citizens the right to kick down my door and kill and use fatal force during the arrest. So it actually gave a license for others to kill gay men. So it's really a good news for the country, for our democracy. The other thing that is really important to remember is that it bolsters our democracy, our constitutional democracy. We don't have parliamentary sovereignty in Namibia. We have the constitution that can only be interpreted by the courts of Namibia. And when it comes to human rights issues, it is the Supreme Court of Namibia that has the final say. What happened with some of the MPs, like I don't want to use the word honorable with the name Ekanjo, right? But I will say Mr. Ekanjo. In this instance, what he tried to do was to overturn the separation of powers in our constitution by trying to make it seem that we have a parliamentary democracy or parliamentary sovereignty. What our constitution clearly states is that laws are made by parliament.
Yeah.
They are enacted by the executive, right? The president and his team through the ministries that then provide the services. But the courts check whether these laws that are made by parliament are subservient to the constitution, which is our basic law and our supreme law. So any law that is created by parliament has to be within the framework of the constitution, and the courts are the only ones to decide that. What we have done is that we have the citizens in a democratic system talk to our government for almost 30 years, right, since independence, to tell them, can you remove this law?
Yeah.
They have not acted. So in 2022, what we also did was that the Law Reform and Development Commission had a project of obsolete laws. Many Namibian civil society brought the laws that they thought were obsolete and that needed to be removed. We also made a submission as the LGBT community. However, what happened with the politicians is that they allowed all the other laws that were useless and obsolete to be removed. They took our submission to remove the Sodomy Law and Unnatural Sexual Offences Act and referred it to a parliamentary subcommittee. It's still sitting there and gathering dust. What I did as an activist, but also as part of the LGBT community, was to use a provision in our constitution which said that although we are taking all the laws from apartheid colonial state at independence, Namibians were personally and substantively aggrieved by the presence of a law, can bring it to the courts and ask the courts, is this law still valid in the framework of the new constitutional dispensation that we are living in? And that's what I did. And so I asked the courts, well, we've spoken to government, they are not listening to us, but the courts are the final arbiters of the constitution and the legal system. And so what I did was to bring it to the court and ask them, should this law still remain on our books in a new constitutional dispensation? After independence, do we need a law that unnecessarily discriminates and stigmatizes a section of community and creates a situation where those who hate this section of community can violate them? For example, kill them, as we have seen in the last couple of months.
That's very true. So does this now the ruling, because I want to understand, what does the ruling mean for the Namibian people, especially for the LGBTQ plus community? Does this mean now that the homosexuality is now legal in Namibia, with only that law that is now removed?
So to be clear, homosexuality was never illegal in Namibia.
Okay.
Being gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender, or intersex was never proscribed or prohibited by our laws. What was prohibited is anal sex between two men. But white people interpreted and understood as a result of this law, the sodomy law, was that being homosexual was illegal. This is not true, right? And so what does this judgment, the verdict, mean for the Namibian population? It means now that gay men and trans women who have intimate sexual relations are no longer regarded as criminals for sharing intimacy between. Also, it does not mean that everyone is required now to be homosexual or to have sex. It just means it's no longer a crime. And so one of the things that a lot of people who are homophobic and transphobic seem to portray is that now we are allowing our children are in danger.
Yeah. Yeah.
The homosexuals are going to come for our children. Or I heard actually one who says that now we're going to have a lot of natural disasters. So you can see that if people are not well, right, and people who are bigoted, people who are homophobes, people who are transphobes are not well. They do need help to understand that in order to be yourself, you don't need to hate someone. No one is forcing you to be gay, or no one is forcing you to have gay sex. You can still be yourselves. Nothing has changed for heterosexual people. Their relationships have always been honored in our society that is more heteronormative in most of the things, in most of the provisions that we have. What we have now done is to include those who were previously marginalized by telling them that because of the way that you have sex, you are not a criminal.
Okay. So does this mean again that, because I know does this mean that again you, like the homosexual or the LGBT plus community, still have to fight for the same-sex marriage, or is it now also legally?
No, it's still not legal. And so a lot of people don't understand even the judgment by the Supreme Court last year, which was not allowing same-sex marriages in Namibia. What had happened was that there were several couples of Namibians who had already been married, some in South Africa, some in Germany, who were living in Namibia with their partners.
Yeah.
They approached the courts and then they said, well, we are having a lot of trouble because our legal relationships are not recognized in Namibia, right? And so it was really about domicile rights, the right for the married partner or the spouse of the Namibian to remain and to work just like any other couple. So if you're heterosexual and you married a Ghanaian or an American or a German person, they can come and live in Namibia and work in Namibia on the basis of the marriage to a Namibian citizen. And so the ruling of last year just said that if people are married in other jurisdictions, legal jurisdictions outside of Namibia, Namibia will honor the contract that they went into and they will be regarded as spouses within the Namibian legal system. It has nothing to do with Namibians who want to get married if both people are Namibian and they go and get married in South Africa. Their legal partnership is still not recognized within our legal system. That is the fight for another day. And I know that people are looking at things like same-sex marriage because it's a controversial issue. But there are other areas where LGBT people are still not included in employment, for example. Right? There's no express protection for LGBT people in the workplace, that they won't be fired from their job because of who they are. The Domestic Violence Act that we have at the moment excludes same-sex couples from a domestic relationship, for example. And so if my partner is violating me and beating me up, I won't have the same right as two heterosexual couples to get a restraining order, for example, that is provided by the courts. It's even worse. The Domestic Violence Act will recognize that me and my brother or me and my cousin, because we live under the same roof, are covered under the Domestic Violence Act. But what then happens when you exclude the same-sex couple is that they are no longer protected by the law as any other Namibian. Also, there's this misconception that homosexual people don't have children. There's nothing wrong with the biology of homosexual people. Many of them because of social attitudes, are in heterosexual relationships before, they may have children.
Yeah.
And when they actually come out of the closet and find a partner, they may be living with their children and a partner in the same house. The current Domestic Violence Act does not protect that family, right? And this is misconception that families are a man and a woman, and their children. It doesn't really recognize the fact that there are so many single-parent households in Namibia. Right? Are you saying that a mother with 4 children or 2 children in a household are not a family? Or a father with his 2 children are not a family? I think that we need to sort of really get out of this mode of hatred, of discrimination, of stigmatization, all because we want to feel better than the next Namibian. Because I'm heterosexual, I'm better. And because I'm heterosexual, I'll make sure that those who are not heterosexual don't get the same legal protections as the rest of Namibians.
Yeah.
If that is the kind of attitude that some of the politicians and some of the sections of society have, and they're saying this is what our forefathers were thinking about, that we have to continue oppression of people because we don't like them, I think they're wrong. Because as a young person at high school, I was part of the liberation struggle. I heard the words of Mr. Ekanjo saying that we did not fight for liberation for homosexuals. But he has to remember there were homosexuals that were part of that fight. And when we were fighting for the liberation of this country, we were not asking who he is sleeping with. I don't know, maybe that's what he was fighting for, to be able to sleep with women. But we were fighting to liberate every single Namibian from the oppression of an apartheid state that looked at the skin color of a person and said, because you're white, you're better than the black or the color or the Indian person, right? And so it's this sickness that is running, and that sickness causes violence, it causes communities, the fabric of the communities to tear, because all of a sudden we are creating enemies within. Instead of saying we are all God's children, we are all covered by the banner of the Namibian flag. And what it means then is that everyone has to have the same opportunities to pursue happiness, because that is what our constitution promises.
Yeah, that's very true. So Uganda actually passed the law, the Anti-Homosexual Act, which includes the death penalty for aggravated homosexuality. And Ghana's parliament passed also a bill to lengthen jail terms for gay sex. So what are your thoughts on these developments?
Well, first of all, we have to realize that many of the African countries, including some of the Namibians' laws, like the anti-gay marriage law, is not really originating from Africa. You know where it originates from?
Please tell me.
From white evangelicals who hate black people in the US. They are funding our politicians and giving them model laws. So if you look at the Uganda law, you look at the Nigerian law, you look at the Ghanaian law, and you look at the Marriage Act that was introduced in our parliament, we call them model laws. They were written by white men in America, imported into Africa, because they've lost colonialism, they still want Africans to fight each other. So what happens is that some of these misguided Christian leaders are forming pacts with American evangelical churches who sponsor them to go to the US. They also sponsor them and write these laws for them. They sponsor them to whip up ignorant African youth to go on the street and march against homosexuals, because they completely misinterpret like the Bible, and pick and choose some of the things that they don't like and ignore others, right?
Yeah.
And so what you have, for example, is a law in Uganda that would kill me because I'm HIV positive and I had sex with someone. That's what this accredited homosexuality actually is defined as. If you're HIV positive and you have sex with someone else, you can be killed by the state, right? It doesn't make sense because allowing two people to love each other does not take away from a heterosexual couple who are in. I mean, it is quite strange that heterosexual people believe that if two gay people love each other, it somehow takes away from their relationship, because it doesn't. I mean, like I was saying earlier, I do not know why people are acting emotionally when two gay men are having sex in the privacy of their homes. What does it take away from you? Yeah. Or do you sleep at night thinking about, oh my goodness, there are now people who are having sex with each other? What business of yours is it what other people do in the privacy of their homes? What business of yours is it, for example, if people wear the kind of clothes that they want to wear? Because you can wear, because it's your body, everyone. So what our constitution promises us is that everyone should have autonomy over their body. If, for example, there was a law that came out and said everyone has to be homosexual, even I would have a problem with it, right? Because we cannot expect heterosexual people to live a homosexual lifestyle. At the same time, we cannot expect homosexual people to live a heterosexual lifestyle based on the feelings and emotions of someone who doesn't like homosexuals. That's not the intention of our constitution. And so we have a situation in Africa at the moment where Africans are being whipped up to fight against each other, to hate each other, while the Europeans are still coming and taking our resources for cheap, while there's a lot of poverty, while there's a lot of unemployment, while there's lack of housing, while we don't have water for every Namibian. We are concerned about two people in the privacy of their home, within their bedroom, are showing intimacy to each other, and we are going out on the street marching, using parliamentary time, for example, for the anti-gay marriage bill. 6 weeks. Within 6 weeks, Parliament passed 2 laws to stop gay marriage by redefining a spouse. Can you imagine that a parliament will take 6 weeks to pass a law to ensure that every Namibian has proper housing with a roof and running water in their homes? No, they won't, right? But because it's election year, because they want votes, and because they somehow falsely believe that Namibians have a hate-filled nature, and that because if they have this hateful legislation, people will go and vote for them. They've rushed through this law. I think it's misguided. I think if we look at the results from Afrobarometer, for example, over the next 2 decades, Namibians have always scored the highest. And then sort of on the question, do you mind having a neighbor who's homosexual? More than 60, 70, 80 Namibians say, no, I don't mind. Do you think that LGBT people should be covered or their human rights should be protected? Most Namibians answer yes to these questions. And so it doesn't really make sense that our politicians believe that if they make a hateful legislation towards a section of society, they will get no votes. There is a small part of very, very vocal homophobic people in Namibia who are using their culture and their tradition, or sometimes religion, to try and force government and to make them believe that their one culture among a diversity of culture or they are one interpretation of the Bible among so many other different. It should be the one that the government should take, and they should use this in order to exclude people and to make them suffer.
Yeah, that's very true. When it comes to religion in Namibia, religion often plays a significant role when it comes to opposing the LGBTQ plus community. So, how do you address religion arguments against homosexuality and advocacy?
Yeah, so I'll answer that as a gay Christian.
Yeah.
Right. We know that Namibia is a predominantly Christian country. Some people are standing on the Bible and using it as a clopper, as a weapon. That was never the intention. The Bible, and that we use it to as a gun.
Yeah.
To shoot people that we don't like.
Yeah.
Right. People must also realize that this very same Bible was used to justify and legitimate slavery, apartheid, exclusion of women from the church, from society, and making them second-class citizens. Just like it's now been used for the oppression of LGBT people in the country. What these people do is that they select some parts of the Bible which they like and ignore the rest. Right? And so some of the Bible say, the biblical text says, if you are in adultery, you must be stoned to death. How many of those people who are now using the Bible for occasional homosexual people are having their wives and they're having girlfriends?
That's true.
Right? The Bible is really clear. The 10 Commandments of Moses are very clear. But even being the 10 Commandments of Moses, which are really, really good, not to steal, respecting your parents, all the 10 Commandments that we have, that we sort of accept as really good guidelines for life, we do keep them. But there is the final law that was brought by Jesus. And if you're a Christian, I mean, personally, I'm a follower of Jesus. When Jesus was asked, how do I love God? He says, love your neighbor as you love yourselves. Right? And which is probably the final law of love, is that we need to love each other and leave the judgment to God. Many of the people don't realize when they're using the Bible that there are so many different verses, even more verses that talk about homosexuality, that talk about non-judgment as a basic principle of Christianity. Right? People forget that because they want to select some things that they like and ignore the things that they don't. But if you read the Bible, you will do it completely, and you have to read it in context. Many of the texts, for example, in Leviticus that people are using, are saying things like you cannot wear different fabrics on the same cloth. You cannot wear wool and linen and silk on the same cloth. It's a sin. You cannot eat pork. It's a sin. How many of us like our bacon? Right, in the morning, or how many like our pork chop? It is something that is not allowed, and it's called a sin in the Bible. There are so many things in the Bible, you cannot just select one. What is also important is that we should not judge and leave judgment to God. We are all creations of God, and we all have different attributes. But we can actually come back to God and ask, what is it that you intended my life to be? Right? And God will give us guidance on what we need to do to come closer to Him. I think this whole argument of religion is just flawed on the basis of the selective reading of the Bible to justify whatever we feel should be done the way we want it to be done. Secondly, beyond the Bible and beyond the religious argument, we need to also keep in mind that not all Namibians are Christians, but they are all covered by the Supreme Court, Supreme Law, in our constitution. And so we have Muslims that are Namibian, we have non-believers that are Namibian, etc. So for us as Christians, obviously in our homes, in our private lives, that we can use Christian principles by which we live, but our constitution makes enough room for those who are not Christian to be able to have the same rights, the same opportunities as Christians in Namibia. It's really a question of being open-minded, because no one is telling you cannot be Christian and you cannot live according to your own principles.
Yeah.
And allow others who are not Christian to live according to their own principles, as long as they don't harm other people, they don't violate the rights of others.
Yeah, that's very true. Thank you so much, Mr. Dausab. We really appreciate you actually coming here. So maybe like to the allies, to the LGBT plus community supporters and everybody, how can they continue to contribute to the ongoing fight for LGBTQ plus rights in Namibia and across the continent?
Yeah. So the first thing to realize is that in order to have a society that functions, we cannot base the way that we conduct ourselves and our legal system with discrimination where some people are more equal than others.
Yeah.
We really need to ensure that everyone is equal. Secondly, I would like to tell LGBT people, especially young LGBT people, to keep the faith, to have the courage to continue to be themselves, and to stop believing the messages that they may be getting. Because as LGBT people, the message that we get is around our genitals.
Yeah.
So once people find out that you're gay, they say, like you probably heard it in Parliament, what is between their legs? Right? And it's not really what's between our legs, it's our entire existence that really matters, because LGBT people don't have sex 24 hours a day, even though this is the belief of homophobes. We go out, we walk, we go to church, some of us, we go shopping, we go to hospital, we live our lives as many other people, so that young LGBT people and other LGBT people actually have a full life. Right? The one last message I would like to give is to parents, especially parents of LGBT people. We know and we realize that the stigma, discrimination, and negative social attitudes are not just towards LGBT people, but also to parents. Keep your children close, give them love, because if you push them away, you're sending them to the wolves. We know about so many LGBT people that are homeless or halfway homeless, who have to sleep on the couches of their friends, who don't have food to eat. Parents stop paying university or school fees for these young children, and they become almost street-based. And what happens is that they become so vulnerable. Sometimes they have to, in order to survive, have survival sex with people that they don't really want. They need to sleep, they need a roof over their heads. Sometimes they have to go out with a crowd, even if they don't want to do drugs or drink or whatever, because these people are the ones that give them a roof to sleep over, give them food. They sort of have to stay with this crowd because they have lost the support of their friends, for their family. And so family support is so important to make sure that young people, whether they're gay or straight, remain healthy, remain productive, are able to go to school, are able to get qualified and then become productive citizens of society. And so my message to parents is keep your children close and make sure that they are well cared for, so they have a religion in their food, that their school is paid for, and that will become really good, productive citizens of society. Being homosexual does not mean that they're not productive. Not having the opportunities in life become a productive citizen, and make people unwell. So I think that is really a big message that I would like really for parents. The support that I received from my mother is what makes me strong. The support that I received from my family is what makes me strong. And so we need to always remember Ubuntu.
Yeah.
I am because you are. And if we're sharing love among each other, then we have a loving society. If it's discrimination, violence, we have a violent society where everybody suffers.
Thank you so much.